Released in March of 1992 for the Super Famicom, Ranma 1/2 Chonai Gekitohen was the first in a line of Ranma 1/2 fighting games. In 1992, the fighting game genre had swept arcades, with Capcom's Street Fighter II and SNK's Fatal Fury having both debuted in 1991, and making the transition to the Super Nintendo the following year. A fighting game with a manga and anime tie-in was the perfect choice to coincide with the increased attention the genre was garnering. While Capcom and SNK's entries into their legendary series showcased precise controls with a variety of combos, Messiah's Ranma 1/2 would take a more pared-down approach. Ranma 1/2 Chonai Gekitohen was developed by Nippon Computer Systems, known as NCS, and published by their parent company Messiah. The company's lasting legacies are the RPG series Langrisser and the surrealist comedic shooter Choaniki, a game filled with semi-naked men and odd boss battles. The company name was a play on the English word Messiah, and the founder Masaya Fujita's name. Messiah published games from 1986 until 2000, eventually selling their copyrights to a software company called Extreme. The two Messiah Ranma 1/2 fighting games, both released in 1992, were produced by Toshiro Tsuchida. Tsuchida's most lasting legacy in software design is his work with Square Enix on Final Fantasy X and XIII. For Final Fantasy X, Tsuchida is responsible for redesigning the battle system, replacing the familiar ATB, or Active Time Battle, with a new CTB, Count Time Battle, as well as the Sphere Grid leveling system. In Final Fantasy XIII, Tsuchida developed the ATB bar, removing the need for magic points for spellcasting. At Square, Tsuchida split his time serving as battle director on Final Fantasy titles, a producer on Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles, and one of the primary figures in the Front Mission series of strategy games.
Hey!
In terms of control, the game differs significantly from similar early 1990s fighting game fare. Ranma 1/2 Chonai Gekitohen featured simple-to-trigger special techniques, lifted from the series, though with very little in the way of a combo system that could make for a deeper battle experience. Jumping was triggered with the press of the X button, making for a less than intuitive method of control, especially when needing to use two buttons for jump attacks. The up directional pad is used to modify certain attacks. Unfortunately, within the game itself, it is not possible to remap the buttons. The L and R shoulder buttons are also used for blocking rather than pressing back, which takes some getting used to. The game was released after the manga had been out for 5 years, and as a result, there are many characters to choose from. Both male and female Ranma are selectable, as well as Tatewaki and Kodachi Kuno, Ginma Saotome, Shampoo, Principal Kuno, and the last boss, Ryoga Hibiki. Cologne and Haposai both serve as hidden characters. The omission of Akane and Ukyo seems odd in hindsight, but hardware restrictions kept the player count low. It would seem logical that a character such as Principal Kuno would be omitted in favor of a more fan favorite, but both Akane and Ukyo would be included in the sequel. The inclusion of Genma in his human form is also unusual, given the more colorful inclusion of his panda form in the subsequent fighting games. The primary mode for the game is the story mode, where you are restricted to either male or female Ranma to battle through each of the rival characters in the game. By holding down the L trigger and the R trigger simultaneously on the character select screen, you can then select the other characters, with the exception of Haposai and Cologne, who are only usable in the two-player versus mode. However, on the main menu, you can hold L, R, and Start when choosing versus mode to gain access to them as well. Speaking of the two elderly characters, both appear in the bonus stages. Haposai first appears after vanquishing Kodachi. Each strike against him causes him to drop a pair of panties from his collection. Cologne appears after battling Principal Kuno. During the battle against her, you must break thrown bowls of ramen and swat away roasted chestnuts as she springs back and forth on her cane. The bonus fights take place in the Tendo Dojo, with numerous characters from the series sitting in the foreground, including Moose, Pantyhose Taro, Akane, Ukyo, Hikaru Gosenkugi, and the Gambling King, all of whom will be selectable characters in the sequel game released just 9 months later in Japan. Interestingly, Cologne and Haposai are fully realized characters when you select them in the two-player mode. They have movesets that are hidden and not seen in the bonus rounds of the game, such as the Hiryu Shotenha and Bakusai Tenketsu. When this was released in 1992, Ranma 1/2 did not have a significant presence in the United States. Viz had recently begun publishing the manga in a 2-chapter per month comic book format, at a time when manga in general was still very much part of a niche market within the American comic book subculture. Thus, there was not much of a desire for a Ranma 1/2 game outside of Japan at the time. Nonetheless, the need for Super Nintendo fighting games made the title desirable for adaptation. Ultimately, Irem decided to license the game. However, rather than localize the game, it was reskinned, turning it into an original game named Street Combat. Each character was reimagined, though all of their moves and win poses were left intact. How amusing to see these generic characters tossing out the secret techniques of anything-goes martial arts. Of course, this was not the first Takahashi game to suffer such a fate. The Momoko 120% arcade game of 1986 was originally intended to be an Urusei Yatsura game, before licensing issues complicated the matter. And so, what is the final verdict on this game? Ultimately, fans of the series will enjoy the game, though the speed and fluidity of the sequel, along with more customizable controller inputs, make the follow-up a more enjoyable experience. At the time of release, venerable Japanese gaming magazine Famitsu scored Ranma 1/2 Chonai Gekitohen a 28 out of 40, while Family Computer magazine scored it a 23.18 out of 30.